A retired military veteran spends his savings building a small wheelchair ramp for his disabled wife. 2 days later, he receives a letter. Not a thank you, not support, not even a warning. A $2,000 fine. The reason? The Homeowners Association says the ramp is visually disruptive to neighborhood standards. What happens next turns an entire town against the HOA. And by the end of this story, the people running the neighborhood will wish they had never touched that mailbox. Because this wasn't just some random homeowner. This was a man who spent 22 years serving his country. His name was Daniel Carter, 64 years old, retired Army sergeant. The kind of man who still folded his shirts perfectly. The kind who woke up at 5 a.m. every day, even after retirement. The kind who thanked cashiers, tipped waitresses well, and saluted the flag during parades. Daniel wasn't rich. He lived in a quiet suburban neighborhood outside Columbus, Ohio. Nothing fancy. Just rows of clean houses, trimmed lawns, American flags on porches, and neighbors who waved when you drove by. For years, Daniel and Evelyn lived peacefully there, until Evelyn suffered a severe stroke. Everything changed after that. The woman who used to garden every morning now struggled to move across the living room. The stairs at the front entrance became impossible. Daniel tried carrying her wheelchair up the steps himself. At first it worked, but one rainy afternoon, he slipped. He hit the ground hard. Neighbors rushed over to help. And that night, Daniel made a decision. He was going to build a wheelchair ramp. Nothing huge, nothing ugly, just a simple wooden ramp leading from the driveway to the front door. Safe, practical, necessary. He hired a licensed contractor. He got the proper city permits. He even matched the wood stain to the house. The finished ramp looked clean, professional, almost invisible from the street. Daniel thought the problem was solved. But 3 houses down, somebody was furious. And America does not react kindly when veterans are treated like trash. Stay until the end because the final meeting changes everything.
Her name was Linda Matthews, president of the Willow Creek Homeowners Association. Linda treated HOA rules like federal law. Grass half an inch too tall? Violation. Trash can visible from the street? Violation. Wrong color curtains? Warning letter. Most people in the neighborhood tolerated her, not because they liked her, because fighting the HOA was exhausting. But when Linda saw Daniel's wheelchair ramp, she completely lost it. At the next HOA board meeting, witnesses later said she called it a visual eyesore that lowers community standards. An eyesore. A wheelchair ramp for a disabled woman. The board members looked uncomfortable, but nobody challenged her. 2 days later, Daniel opened his mailbox. Inside was a formal HOA notice. The letter stated, unauthorized structural modification visible from public roadway. Fine amount, $2,000. Additional daily penalties could follow if the structure remained. Daniel stared at the paper silently. Then he read it again and again. Evelyn saw his hands shaking. After everything he had seen in the military, after deployments, after surgeries, after years of sacrifice, a neighborhood HOA was threatening him over a wheelchair ramp. That night, Daniel didn't sleep, and the next morning, he walked directly to the HOA office. Security camera footage later showed Daniel calmly entering the building with the violation letter in his hand. No yelling, no threats. Just a tired old veteran asking for common sense. Linda refused to remove the fine. According to witnesses, Daniel explained that the ramp was medically necessary. Linda's response? Rules are rules. Daniel asked if there was an appeal process. Linda smiled. There is, but you'll still need to remove the ramp during review. Remove the ramp, meaning his disabled wife would be trapped inside the house. That's when people in the office started getting uncomfortable. One employee later said, you could literally feel the room changing. But Linda kept going. She warned Daniel that unpaid HOA violations could eventually result in legal action or liens against a property. At this point, Daniel finally asked her one question. Did you even think about my wife when you sent this? Linda reportedly replied, this community has standards. Daniel nodded slowly. Then he left. No yelling, no drama, which somehow made it worse because quiet anger is usually the dangerous kind, and Linda had no idea what was coming.
The story probably would have stayed local. But one neighbor changed everything. A woman named Rachel lived across the street. She had watched Daniel help Evelyn for months. She saw him carefully wheel her outside every evening so she could watch sunsets. Rachel was furious after hearing about the fine. So she took a photo. Daniel standing beside the wheelchair ramp, one hand on Evelyn's wheelchair, the HOA violation notice visible in his other hand. She posted it online with a simple caption. HOA fines retired Army veteran for building wheelchair ramp for disabled wife. That was it. No hashtags, no clickbait. Within hours, the post exploded. Thousands of shares, then tens of thousands.
People across America were furious. Veterans groups started reposting it. Disability advocates joined in. Local news stations picked it up. Then national pages started covering the story. Comment sections turned nuclear. People called the HOA heartless, cruel, disgusting. Former military members flooded the internet defending Daniel. One comment got over 70,000 likes. It said, "This man served his country for 22 years and your biggest concern is a wheelchair ramp?" Another said, "Imagine bullying a disabled woman to protect property values." But things got even worse for the HOA, because internet outrage was about to become real-world outrage.
The next HOA meeting was supposed to be routine. Instead, it looked like a protest. Cars lined the streets, neighbors packed the room, veterans arrived wearing service jackets and military caps. Some people brought American flags, others brought printed copies of the violation letter. Local reporters stood near the entrance. For the first time in years, Linda Matthews looked nervous. The meeting started normally, then public comments began, and everything fell apart. One woman stood up and said, "My father fought in Vietnam. If he needed a wheelchair ramp and somebody fined him for it, I'd lose my mind." Huge applause. Then another resident spoke. "Half this neighborhood has ugly basketball hoops, broken fences, and rusted mailboxes, but the wheelchair ramp is the problem?" More applause. Then a former Marine walked to the microphone. The room went silent. He looked directly at the HOA board and said, "You should be ashamed of yourselves." Nobody interrupted him, nobody argued, because deep down, everyone knew he was right. Then Daniel finally stood up. The room immediately quieted. He wasn't angry. That's what made it powerful. He simply explained what Evelyn's life had become after the stroke, how difficult basic tasks were, how embarrassed she felt needing help, and how the ramp gave her one small piece of independence back. Some people in the audience were visibly crying. Then Daniel said something nobody forgot. "I spent most of my adult life serving this country. I never thought I'd come home and have to fight my own neighborhood just so my wife could enter her house safely." The room exploded into applause. People stood up. Somebody shouted, "Remove the fine." Then others joined in. "Remove the fine! Remove the fine!" The chant echoed through the room. Linda tried hitting the gavel repeatedly. Nobody cared anymore because she had completely lost the neighborhood. The backlash became so intense that attorneys started contacting Daniel for free. One disability rights lawyer publicly stated the HOA might actually be violating federal housing protections. That changed everything, because now this wasn't just bad publicity, this could become a legal disaster. The HOA's own legal team reportedly advised them to back down immediately, but Linda still refused, until sponsors pulled out of HOA community events, until local businesses publicly sided with Daniel, until national media kept calling. Then came the final blow. A major veterans organization offered to fully cover Daniel's legal costs. Suddenly, the HOA realized something terrifying. This wasn't a fight they could win anymore. Not financially, not publicly, not morally. 3 days later, residents received an emergency email. The HOA was officially withdrawing all fines. They would also revise neighborhood policies regarding accessibility modifications. But the damage was already done, because the internet never forgot Linda Matthews, and neither did the town. A month later, neighbors organized a block party for Daniel and Evelyn. Veterans attended from across the county. People brought food, kids decorated the wheelchair ramp with small American flags. And for the first time in months, Evelyn smiled in public again. Daniel later gave a short interview. He didn't insult the HOA, he didn't attack Linda. Instead, he said, "I just hope people remember that compassion matters more than appearances." That quote spread everywhere online. And as for Linda, she quietly resigned from the HOA board not long after. No farewell speech, no public apology, just gone. All because a veteran built a wheelchair ramp for the woman he loved, and an HOA decided that was somehow unacceptable.